So what is one of the forms for the linear equation that we've talked about? Okay, good. And that's the one that is probably the most important because you can graph when it's in that form. What can you see really easily in slope intercept form? And what letter tells you your y-intercept? The B. I know it's confusing because there is a y in there. But think like X and Y are your input and output. X and Y will say X and Y in the formula. M and B are replaced with numbers. So C is your y-intercept. And then what else can you see in slope intercept form? The slope, which is M, and it's always in front of the X or attached to some variable. And that is your slope. And it's in the name. Slope intercept form, you can see the slope and you can see the y-intercept super clearly. The other form of linear equations that we've been talking about, and I feel like most of the time when they give you a problem, it's not in slope intercept form, it's in this other form instead. This is our standard form. And it's helpful like when you're making word problems, because like the total will be alone on one side and then what contributes to it will be on the other side. So when you make equations for word problems, they probably look like this. But if we're trying to solve by graphing and things like that, we'd rather it be like this. Because in standard form, you can't see the slope or y-intercept that clearly. You might notice like certain patterns. So you might notice that when I do start rearranging it to slope intercept form, like what's alone in slope intercept form? Like in this equation, what's alone on one side? The y. So if I want to make this slope intercept form so I can see my slope and y-intercept better, and I start isolating my y in order to do that, you're still getting rid of what's farther from it. And then you are, instead of multiplying by b, you're dividing by b from each term. And you can see some trends this way. I personally don't like memorizing this, but maybe it'll help. Maybe. So I'll show you. If you are comparing your standard form, and A, B, and C will always be like numbers. You can get your slope by doing negative A divided by B. So like if I have, and I'm just gonna make one up. 2x plus 3y equals 4. If I want the slope without having fully rearranged it, I could just remember that it's whatever negative A is over B. And that's my slope. Without really rearranging the whole thing. If I want to memorize that my y-intercept is always C over B when it's in standard form, well, my C is 4. And my B is 3. And then I get my y-intercept really easily that way. I don't like memorizing that. I like memorizing as few things as possible. And what I memorize is how to properly rearrange things. And then I can do it. But if that helps you, then so be it. You might see that on your test. So we also just barely at the end got to touch on like the technology part of it. So I'll come back to this. We didn't really get to do the matching activity because there was a quiz. But if you were to try to use Desmos to help you identify the slope and y-intercept when it's given to you in standard form, like these were, all you have to do is type it exactly how it looks. You don't have to rearrange it. So 12x minus 4y equals 8. right? So if you type it in, even in standard form, it will graph it for you. And as long as you know where to look, you can identify your y-intercept. So like for this one, my y-intercept is -2. And you can figure out your slope. If you're figuring out slope from the graph, what formula do we use? Rise over run. So for that to work, you have to pick two spots that you can see super clearly. For Desmos, like I don't really like when the grid lines aren't going up by 1. Right now it's going up by like 25, so I'm gonna kind of make it to where they go up by 1. But you want to pick two areas on your graph that you can see really clearly without having to estimate. So like, I don't want to pick my x-intercept because that's a decimal. But if I look over here, that is at the coordinate 1, 1. I don't have to estimate that one. And when you're counting your rise and your run, you're counting how much do I have to go up from here to here. So going up 1, 2, 3. And then my run is going to the right 1. So then my slope is 3. That, or you just know how to do it. Up to you. Right. So then for that matching activity, the one that I would pick that matches is E, or this one. So that has a slope of 3 and a y-intercept of -2. All right. But yeah, so that's what we looked at today and are trying to get better at. That's our end goal, is to be able to go from standard to slope intercept form. I will leave it on the screen while you work on your practice, in case you want to look back up at these and try some of these out. But the practice is 2.11. That's the one you need to get 80% or higher on before you move on to other things. If I moved you from where you were sitting, it might be because you have too many things missing, so I might make more of those missing things. Before I let you. Okay. Show me that it's done first, and then I'll explain. All right, so we have this graph that shows how much money Priya has in her savings account weeks after she started saving on a regular basis. How much does she have in the account after 10 weeks? So definitely use the axes to help you. They are labeled. So which axis is for weeks? And we want to know how much she has after 10 weeks. So I'm going to find 10 on my x-axis. I'm going to see where it touches on the line. And that y value that's there is 320. That's how much she has in her savings at that 10-week mark. So 320. How long did it take her to save 200? So that 200, is that weeks or dollars? Okay, so then that means I need to look at the axis that says dollars, find the 200, see where it touches on the line, and see at what week she hits that 200 mark. So then that would be at 5 weeks. That makes sense? Okay. How much does she have in her savings account when she started to save regularly? So at the start of her saving, so like at week 0, how much did she have? Good. And that's our y-intercept. If you didn't notice, your y-intercept in the real world is usually a starting amount of some sort, or like a one-time fee, something like that. All right, so there's that. Which equation represents the dollar amount Y in her savings account and the number of weeks X of saving? So notice they are both in slope intercept form. We identified the y-intercept already. So which one does it have to be?
Gunnar? Good. So I think when you have the graph given to you, I think the y-intercept is definitely the easiest to see. So when there's only two options and they have different y-intercepts, I think that's the best way to pick your right answer. But you can also see like the 24 is the slope. If you happen to find two spots that line up really nicely. So like if I was trying to figure out my slope, maybe I didn't have options. I can see here it lines up really nicely, and also right here. I can use that to make my triangle to help me find my rise and my run. But keep in mind, like these tick marks are not necessarily going up by one. So you need to take that into consideration. So what's the change going from 200 to 320? What is my rise there? Good. And then what is my run when I'm going from 5 to 10? Okay, good. And since slope is rise over run, 120 divided by 5 is 24, I'm guessing, because that's what the slope was for our right answer. But I will double check in my calculator. And it is 24. Okay, so that's how you could tell the slope if it wasn't given to you. Questions on that? Okay, questions on others? 11. Okay. So question 2, lesson 11. What is the y-intercept of each equation? So you have a couple options. You could make sure that they are all in slope-intercept form. And then remember that if it's in slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, what value, what letter tells me my y-intercept? Yeah. E, good. So if it's in this format, which only one out of the three are, then you can tell your y-intercept without having to do any math, because it'll be like the single number, not the one that's attached to the x. So what's my y-intercept of this one? 2. And it should match whatever sign is here, like if it's positive or negative, like it shouldn't be the opposite at all. So that one's good, because it's in y-intercept form, or slope-intercept form. This one is in standard form. So if you follow that little trick I showed you earlier, it's something that you could memorize. I think I erased it already. But if this were A, this were B, and this were C, and you were doing the like rearranging to make it into slope-intercept form, it might look something like this. See, like, I don't memorize that thing I showed you, I just know how to rearrange things. But when I rearrange it into slope-intercept form, it becomes negative 2x plus 6. So that would be your C divided by B is always your y-intercept. If you like memorizing random things like that, go ahead. I just like knowing how to rearrange things so that I can just get it easily without having to think too hard what over what. But what's my y-intercept for this one? 6. And it's positive. All right, now the last one, we don't really do this one. I mean, it's not even perfectly in that form anyway. We don't really do point slope form if you are familiar with that. These other two are main focus. But if you want to get it into slope-intercept form, it only actually takes one step. Because what's alone in slope-intercept form? On one side of the equal sign. The y. So if I can get rid of this -6 that is next to the y, then I should get it in slope intercept form, and then it should be really easy to see. So how do I cancel the -6? Whatever you do to one side. And you can only combine things if they're like terms, so like the 23x, there's no other like term. The -4 plus 6, you can combine single numbers with -4 plus 6. And now it's in slope intercept form, and my y-intercept for this one is a positive. They wrote it in coordinate form, which really is good practice. I mean, you can just say that your b equals 2 or your y-intercept equals 2, you can say that. But just know like this is in coordinate form because by definition, the x is always 0 when you're finding your y-intercept. All right, other questions? Better? On what's an option? So Han wants to find the intercepts of the graph of the equation 10x plus 4y equals 20. He decided to put it in slope intercept form first, which is a good strategy. Here is his work. Sorry, it's like super spaced out. And he concluded that the x-intercept is 12 and the y-intercept is 5. We're gonna complete the following to describe the error that he made. And so let's see. When you're finding the error, try to see what's different from the first line to the second and so on. So how did this change? What did they do? They got rid of the 10x. How do you make that cancel? Subtract it, whatever you do on one side. And did he do it correctly? Yeah, so it canceled it out here. These aren't like terms, so you can combine them. So that is not the mistake. We're still continuing to put it in slope intercept form and also see what's different here. How would you cancel out this 4 that's next to the y? Maybe if it was 4 plus y, then we'd subtract the 4, but we have 4 times y, so we need to do the opposite of that, which is dividing. And whatever you do on one side of the equal sign, you do to the other side. And now this is like our warm up from today, where you could write it like that, the right side. Or you could separate it like this, so that your simplifying is a little bit easier. So then 20 divided by 4, is that 5? Is 20 divided by 4 or 5? Okay, so that part's not the mistake. The mistake is that he didn't divide the -10x by 4. So what it should be is y equals 5 minus, well, I guess you have to simplify that as well. So let me that. -10/4. If you're simplifying fractions by hand, think what goes into both numbers, and they're both even, so I know 2 goes into both. What's 10 divided by 2? What's 4 divided by 2? So that's my simplified fraction. You can also just type this in Desmos, hit the fraction to decimal button, and it'll simplify it for you. But this is my correct answer that it should be. So let's see what, so when Han divided both sides of the equation by 4, he neglected to divide what by 4? The -10x. What are the x and y intercepts then? So if you don't know how to, well, you have 2 options. You could type this into Desmos. And you could look at your x-axis and your y-axis. But the other day we learned how to find these by hand. So if I want to find my x-intercept by hand, the x-intercept is when what happened? Here, I'll just tell you, 'cause I don't know if you know yet. Hopefully you'll hear it so many times that you will know. Your x-intercept by definition is when y is 0. So if I plug in 0 for the y, and if I plug it in here, it's like not as easy to solve, so I'll plug it into my original, which was 10x before y equals 20. Okay, so your x-intercept is y equals 0. So if I plug in a 0 for the y, I get 10x equals 20 because 4 times 0 is 0. What's opposite of multiplying by 10? And I get that x-intercept should be what? 2. And how we have it. Alright, so positive 2. And then my y-intercept, so if my x-intercept is when y is 0, my y-intercept is when. Good. So if I was doing it, and it's easier to find your x and y intercepts from standard forms, that's why I chose this one. Maybe it actually might be easier from this one too. Because your y-intercept is just that when it's slope intercept form. But either one. If I plug it into my slope intercept form, the x being 0, I get that y equals 5. So this cancels out, y equals 5. So my y-intercept is 0, 5. So that's an x is 0. All right. Good, any questions? On this one, I mean like this problem. Okay, let me zoom out real quick and erase. And also let me make sure the E is right, because sometimes there are errors. Okay. Okay. Jalen, what question is that? 6 on the 11 practice. So the school sells adult tickets and student tickets for play. It collects 1,400 in total. The graph shows the possible combinations of the number of adult tickets sold and the number of student tickets sold. What does the vertical intercept 0 to 100 tell us? What do our y-intercepts tell us almost all the time? Okay, maybe I'll need to think my question. So my y-intercept, which axis is my y-axis? So this one, and what does it say on it? So that is representing 200 student tickets sold when there are 0 adult tickets sold. Because that coordinate, when you read it, is 0 to 100. It always goes x and then y. The x says adults. That's the x-axis right here. And my y-axis says student. So that's how you're interpreting it. So it says that if no adult tickets were sold, then 200 student tickets were sold. That was good so far. This one says the opposite, so I'm not gonna pick that one. And then about the decrease in sale of each ticket, that is more like your slope. So saying how much the adult tickets decrease when a student ticket is sold is more like your slope rather than your line. Okay, does that make sense? Other question, Lana? All right. So what graph represents this equation? And you have a few options. What's different about each one? Well, one of them has a different y-intercept. And then the ones that have the same y-intercept have different, like a positive or negative slope. So let's see. I think slope intercept form will be the easiest. Again, you could also type it in Desmos, but I don't want you just to rely on Desmos. I want you to know actually how to do it. But if I want it to be in slope intercept form, what do I need to isolate? What's alone in slope intercept form? The y. That's what I'm gonna isolate here. Starting with what's farther from the y, so how do I cancel the 3x? And whatever you do on one side. Okay, great. I get 12 minus 3x equals 4y. What's opposite of multiplying 4? So there we go, one side. And don't forget that you're moving it to each term, which we did in our warm-up today. What's 12 divided by 4? 3. And then this slope can stay a fraction. That's actually, I think, easier to understand than its decimals. So we can rule out between graphs A, B, and C. We can rule out graph C because graph C doesn't have a y-intercept of 3, right? So between A and B, we want the one that has a slope that is -3/4. So also, if it's a negative slope, it'd be going down from left to right. So is it gonna be graph A or graph B? Graph A. If it has a negative slope and the y-intercept is 3. Side note, the slope is going down 1, 2, 3 to the right 4. In case there's some that are similar on your test. And I think that's all we have time for, unless someone has a really quick question. But anything else? Yeah. So the sign that's in front of it, see how this one's like a negative report? That's like, good question.